Arrowhawk, read by Federica Yee. Hawk, young and strong, soared high above an open field. His large eyes searched the dried grasses below. A mouse raced in and out of the stubble. Hawk swooped down, snatched his prey, and carried it to a fence post. There in the autumn sun he tore and ate the mouse with his hooked beak. Twang! Out of nowhere, an arrow streaked through the air and pierced Hawk's upper thigh and tail. He screeched in pain. A flash of movement on his left signaled more danger. Stunned by the arrow, Hawk hesitated. Then he beat his wings, rose above his attacker, and flew into the distant trees. Hawk tried to perch, but the arrow snagged on small branches. He flew higher until he landed on an open limb in a red oak. Pain pulsed through his body. He pecked wildly at the arrow lodged in his thigh. Then he twisted his head and tried to push the arrow out of his tail. Blood seeped from the wounds, but the arrows did not budge. It was now a part of him. For 2 days and nights Hawk rested high in the red oak. He only left his roost to scoop water from a nearby stream. Ignoring his pain, he cleaned his wounds by gently picking the dirt and bugs from the openings. He then preened himself by sliding his beak down the shaft of each feather and tucking it into place. Weary, he slept. By the 3rd morning, Hawk was hungry. He spotted a black rat snake in the underbrush. He flapped his wings and glided down. Snatch! Hawk flew into a tree and held the snake against the limb. But when he bent down to eat, his beak kept bumping into the arrow. After 3 tries, Hawk finally pushed his head far enough to the side so he could eat his prey. During the next 4 weeks, Hawk's wounds healed around the arrow, and he grew stronger. Then the days began to shorten and cooler winds blew from the north. Hawk's instinct to fly south led him away from the land he knew. He glided over harvested fields and busy barnyards. He sailed south over highways and rest areas. Sometimes he perched on poles on power lines, watching for unsuspecting prey. Late one afternoon, Hawk caught a mouse in a hayfield and carried it into a cottonwood tree. As he tried to land, the arrow wedged itself between the trunk and a branch. Hawk's right foot twisted backward. He could not move out of the tree. Hawk flapped his wings several times, but he was still stuck. He pecked and jabbed and pulled the arrow with his beak. Nothing. Then, gathering all his remaining strength, he beat his wings and pushed with his feet. Crack! Hawk's lower right leg snapped. At the same time, the arrow bent and the tip broke off. Pain shot through Hawk, but the push had been enough. He was free. Hawk flew up to the top of the cottonwood. Not only had he broken his leg, but he had reopened the arrow wounds. Fresh blood trickled down his body. He was exhausted and hungry. He had dropped the mouse and was too weak to hunt again. Before the sun set, Hawk was asleep. Hawk awoke to cooler winds and pelting rains. His broken bone had not punctured the skin, but the leg was painful under his weight. Hawk winced every time he moved, so he only used his left leg to land and perched. For the next 2 days, he took shelter in a grove of white pines, and gradually the bone began to mend. On the 3rd morning, Hawk flew out into the gray sky. Even though the arrow continued to weaken him, he traveled south for 5 miles before he stopped. He searched for a remote tree to perch, but all he saw were buildings, cars, and people. Hawk rested on a telephone pole. From his lookout, he spotted a field. Near dusk, he circled the open area and found it teeming with mice, which were easily caught. Later, he settled into a tall oak in a wood on the other side of the field. But every flight, every landing seemed to tire him more. Hawk closed his eyelids and slept. Cold rains blanketed the area for the next 5 days. Chilled and hurting, Hawk remained in his safe roost. Finally, one afternoon, the sun broke through the trees. Still weak from the arrow, but hungry, Hawk left his perch. He was gliding over the field, now full of standing water, when he heard the chirping of birds close to the highway. Hawk flew ahead and saw a covey of sparrows near the ground. They fluttered and bumped, one on top of another. If Hawk could capture a bird, it would be his first meal in days. On silent wings he dove, talons ready. Just as he reached for his prey, invisible net loops entangled his feet. Hawk screeched loudly again and again. He couldn't reach the sparrows, and he couldn't fly away. Hawk beat his wings faster and faster. The more he struggled, the more his talons and feet became twisted in the snare. He fought, he screeched, he pecked, he flapped and flapped and flapped, until darkness surrounded him. The fight was over. Every muscle relaxed as Hawk's head was covered and he was taken away in a warm box. Later, gloved hands held him high and he again beat his wings, struggling for freedom. But a firm grasp carried Hawk inside a building where an anesthetic helped him slip into sleep. When he awoke, the arrow was gone and his wounds were bandaged. Hawk sat in a small cage facing the woods. Weak and sore, he perched motionless, watching songbirds dart in the distance. Later, a tray of food and a bowl of fresh water was set within his reach. Hawk ate and drank. Day by day, he grew stronger. After his wounds healed, Hawk joined other hawks in a large flight cage. He had his own perch. He could flap his wings and glide from one end to the other. Between flights, he preened. Many of his feathers felt longer and fuller. With the arrow gone, Hawk could now stretch and groom his tail feathers. Every other day, Hawk rode in a box to an open field. He wore leather straps that were attached to a flight line. Gloved hands tossed him into the air. Hawk felt the cold rush beneath him. He rose, flapped, and glided toward a small stand of trees. He knew this feeling of freedom well, but his flight always ended when the line ran out and pulled him back. Every time Hawk crossed that field, his muscles grew stronger and he flew faster than before. Early one cold morning, Hawk rode farther to another field, a field he knew. Gloved hands brought him into the sunlight. Again Hawk was held high. His leather straps were cut and fell to the ground. Hawk felt the north wind brush his face, and he heard a voice. "You survived, Arrowhawk. Fly home." Familiar hands tossed him gently into the winter air. Hawk flapped his wings and skimmed the earth. Then he beat his wings harder, rose, and flew over the trees. And straight as an arrow, Hawk soared into the wild.